All right, so now I am in Lightroom, and I have an image that is an example from the other day where I talked about photographing with a 50mm lens and being able to stitch that together into a panorama for an image that requires a little bit wider angle to it. So I'm going to go ahead and I've selected these images, and I'm going to go up and, okay, why is this not, there we go. Get out of full screen mode here. Oh, interesting. We just lost our screen because I lost Lightroom. How sad. All right, so let me get my files again. See, that was at the end of that shoot. I think. Yes, okay, so there we are. To merge these, I go to Photo and Photo Merge Panorama. And that's a pretty good merge. Now you can see the progress up here in this part of the screen where it's creating the panorama for me. And I do this all the time because it allows me to recompose an image. If I couldn't fit it in the frame, sometimes I can't get to the right angle to get everything in, so I'll just panorama, stitch it together and recompose. And there it is right here. And so I'll open that in Photoshop. And what's really nice about doing panoramas Lightroom, as I said before, is it keeps the original raw file format. So I can do a lot of adjustments on it. All right, so I'm going to just go ahead and crop this real quick. I'm not going to do a particular proportion. I'm just going to actually do a custom crop. Felt like a Charlie Brown Christmas tree to me, the way it was bent over like that. So I've selected it with my marquee. I'm going to go to Image and Crop. I'm going to save this real quick. I'm going to do a quick black and white conversion. So I'll go to Camera Raw Filter. And I'm going to open up the highlights just a little bit. Grab those and bring them up a little bit. Okay. And we haven't talked about it for a while, but I'm going to go ahead and show you something else about this image. And that is I want to go back to the 20-step grayscale. And what I want to do is I want to get my info palette out, and I want to show you something really important right now. Is when I use the info palette, wherever I move my cursor, I get an RGB value, and I also have options to view this representation in other color models, one of which is the grayscale model. And so I can come in here and see that even though it looks pretty bright on my monitor, it's at 26% right here. And so when I look at that grayscale value, I know that that is about a zone 7 on that grayscale. And so I know that it's got plenty of textural detail. And in fact, as I look around the room and how this image is represented on your computer, it looks darker on most of your computers than it does my particular monitor. This monitor seems to be a little out of calibration. And so there could be all kinds of reasons why that image doesn't appear correctly to my eye, but I don't care as long as I am looking at these numbers and seeing that I'm not going above 10%, which would be a bright highlight with still having some texture to it. 5% would be the brightest value that I would have just be a little bit darker than pure white. So there's a couple of visual tools I can use. One is the histogram, and the other is if I want to go in here and do a adjustment layer. Let's say I was playing with levels, and we'll talk about this more in the color module. I tend to use levels for monochrome and curves for color, okay? So, but just real quick, if I hold the Option key as I move my cursor in from the highlight side, I can see where there's clipping happening. And so I know I don't have any clipping in this image in the highlights. And if I grab from the left, I can see just a few black values there, but that doesn't bother me a bit. And in fact, I could actually enhance the contrast a little bit by letting a little bit of pure black in there. And let's just take a look at the before and after. Before, after. See how that just added a little bit of contrast in there? Okay, so now the next thing I really want to talk to you about is image sharpening. Okay, and so I'm going to flatten this image. I'm not going to really worry about saving this image. Command E will flatten the current layer down. It'll merge it down. Or I could have gone up to layer and flatten image, but Command E will just take whatever's the top layer, merge it to the next layer below it. And I just learned those keystroke commands from just using it all the time. All right, so now I am going to demonstrate sharpening, and I'm first going to demonstrate it the way it replicates darkroom techniques. There's a term, the filter that we use quite often in Photoshop is actually named for a darkroom technique of unsharp masking, okay? And so that would be one technique I could use, sharpening. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on sharpening. There's like a zillion different ways to do it. Everybody has a different argument of how to do it. But you can change the radius, you can change the percentage, and get really ridiculous, right? I can make it so sharp it's like staring at a porcupine, okay? So unsharp mask, though, is actually based on a real darkroom technique, and I'm going to show you manually how that technique is done digitally. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a couple of duplicate layers, okay? So I'm going to create a duplicate layer, and I'm going to duplicate it another time. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to inverse. I'm going to go to Image, Adjust, and Invert, which is Command I. And I'm going to change this blend mode to a linear dodge, and the image will disappear. So what I have is the exact opposite negative image canceling out this positive image, okay? Now, to create my sharpening, I'm going to go to a Gaussian blur right here. And what that Gaussian blur is going to do is it's going to throw things out of whack to where a little bit of the top layer is going to show through because it's not being canceled out by the bottom positive image. Okay, so this inverted image is actually starting to show through a little bit. And I'm going to exaggerate this a little bit here. All right, so to do this unmasking technique, I am going to merge these together, and I forgot an important step. And that is I'm going to use my levels adjustment to really bring out the edges. There we go. See how that just looks like a pen and ink drawing? It's kind of lovely, actually. And now I'll turn on the bottom layer and I'll hit the multiply mode. And now we can look at before and after. See how it just added a lot of texture to it? Okay. So that is based upon a traditional darkroom technique. I've actually done that in my darkroom before. And it's a lot of work to line up your negative and make another positive and build that edge mask. All right, so here we are with our original image. And I'm going to show you the technique that I probably use the most today. I'll use the unsharp filter, I'll use the smart sharpening filter, but actually for quick and dirty sharpening, I'm going to show you the technique I use the most. And that is to simply go to a duplicate layer and apply a high pass filter. High pass filter. And that high pass is kind of doing in one step, very similar to what I just demonstrated. It's looking for edge contrast, and I can control how much of that edge is coming through. And so I'm going to go ahead and do it at pretty high level just so you can see it. And once this is done, I'm going to change my blend mode to overlay. So here's my blend mode, and I'll go to overlay. And now let me zoom in so you can really see how sharp this is. There's before, there's after. Before, after. You see how that just really punches up the edge contrast. And that's really all sharpening is. You can't really fix an out of focus image, although there are some cameras now that have algorithms that can change the focal point on an image. But for the most part, a raster image, two-dimensional raster image, you can't really sharpen it. You can create the illusion of sharpness by changing the edge contrast. And then I can back that off by changing my opacity, okay? And so one of the things that I have to let you know is that images that I'm putting on my website need more sharpening than my prints. And the reason being is a print typically has a little bit more contrast because of the dot pattern being laid down. There's a little bit of edge contrast to it. Don't quote me on that, but it's my theory at this point, is that there's a little more, because of the halftone screening and the pixelography, my prints don't need as much sharpening as the screen-based images do. And so I do 2 levels of sharpening for a client. I'll do my social media sharpening at a little higher level than my print sharpening, okay? But now I'm going to show you one other facet with this. I'm going to throw this out. We'll go back to starting over. And I'm going to save this right now. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to create a duplicate layer. And this time, I'm going to convert this layer to a smart object. When I do this, I'm creating a larger file size, but I'm getting non-destructive capabilities when applying filters. And what I mean by that is by creating a smart layer, any filter effect I apply after it's become a smart layer, I can go back and re-edit, and it will recalculate it so that it's not a fixed edit, okay? It's not fixed until I rasterize that layer again. So you'll know a smart object when we're done here because there'll be a little layer, a little icon here on this layer. All right, so here is this icon that shows it as a smart object. And so now what happens is I will go ahead and apply my filter, and what's going to happen is, and I'm going to make it extreme. Oh yeah, it's going to be a porcupine. And you'll notice, you'll see this looks almost like a layer mask on here. And what it is I can now, first of all, I'm going to change my mode to overlay. Okay. Look at that before and after. Okay. But now I could actually double click on this high pass filter and change my settings back to something a little more reasonable. So it allows me to reinterpret or reevaluate a filter effect that I've applied to that smart layer. Does that make sense? Okay. So that's pretty exciting. We're going to be using that when we get into our portrait mode where we're doing skin retouching. We want to be able to go back and make some adjustments. We're going to use smart objects for that. But I want you to notice the file size gets a little bit bigger when you have a smart object as a layer. Okay. Everything that we have right here is available to us in terms of I can now apply, I've got a built-in layer mask with my smart object right there. So anytime you see this like white layer attached to it, look how this is just allowing me to come undo that, just like we talked about earlier with layer masking. So I've got so much control over this image. Okay. Or I can click on that, and guess what? With layer mask, I can always undo by simply filling with either white or black. So I can go back to showing it as really sharp on there, or I can invert it to block the whole thing.